The Last of the 20 by Joseph N. Wdowski. Water. At the edge of Greenwich, they reached the bridge to cross the Mianus River that flowed into the Cobb Harbor. To the north of them was located the Mianus Pond Dam. Crossing the bridge, they would be entering Stamford. "I don't think you want to go that way." 124 seemed concerned, halting before they crossed the bridge. "My sensors show that the bridge is sound." Miller stopped. "The bridge is not the problem. Remember, my sensor technology is much better than your helmet system. The problem is I am picking up dozens of nests in Stamford." 124 explained. "I recommend you detour around Stamford." The robot looked to the north at a road that ran alongside the Mianus Pond and river. Miller looked north at the much more wooded area. He could hear the water running over the small dam. "Is it clear?" "Well, yes, unless you are afraid of white-tailed deer, squirrels, and other cute small woodland creatures." 124 replied. "Haha." Miller looked at his map display. "Going around Stamford would add a lot of time to their journey. We should be able to get through Stamford before nightfall. Beyond Stamford is Norwalk, also a highly populated area. My sensors at this distance cannot pick up how many nests are there." 124 pointed out. "That is if we don't run into any roadblocks in Stamford and get stuck there at nightfall. I recommend we travel north and detour around Stamford and Norwalk." Miller examined the Mianus Road that traveled north, west of the river. Its location to the park area around the pond and river made it much more overgrown than Route 1. "It is going to slow down my progress greatly. Getting overwhelmed by hundreds of mutants will end your progress." 124 responded, sighing deeply. "Agreed." Miller walked up to the robot, unsheathing the machete attached to the side of his backpack. With the machete in his right hand, he moved away from the bridge and began their detour north to avoid entering the city center of Stamford. Miller thought if he was alone, he could have made his way north in better time on what remained of Mianus Road. Yet, for the robot to traverse the route without additional delays, he needed to use the machete to remove sections of vines and wild shrubs that would have hindered the robot. As they moved north, they spotted different groups of white-tailed deer. The groups would consist of one buck with their doe harems and fawns. The animals were flourishing along the banks of the small river. Miller had his helmet computer take note for when there will be a need for him to hunt for game. What he did need at the time was to replenish his fresh water. His canteens were alarmingly light. Hoping that the moving waters of the Mianus River would be clear of the virus, he took a sample. Damn. The test strip again turned bright red. He stood and looked around. "I'm going to need to set up a still." "Do you know how to build a still?" 124 asked. Miller walked past the robot towards a large home on the other side of the road. "I do." Walking up to the front door, he turned to 124. "Well, no nests." The robot finished its scan. The door was open. Entering the spacious home, it was what used to be known as a McMansion, a large upper-middle-class home. The structure was still sound, since water had not yet found a way into the building. Dust and cobwebs that had collected over 25 years was the only sign of the passage of time. Miller made his way to the back of the house, finding the kitchen and a gas stove. Checking the supply of natural gas for cooking stopped decades ago. He then turned his attention to the refrigerator that had a cold water and ice dispenser on one of the doors. Miller put his machete down on the granite countertop and with both arms began shaking the large refrigerator and walking it out of its spot. Once it was pulled out far enough from the wall, Miller picked up his machete and went behind the refrigerator. With 2 swings of his machete, he then emerged from behind the refrigerator with a copper tube. "What's that?" 124 asked. "It's the copper water line to feed water to the ice machine and cold water dispenser." Miller began twisting the tubing into a coil. You think you can find uninfested water in the tubing? That seems silly, and not enough to sustain you for long. It is for the still. I can use the tubing to cool and condense water vapor into clean drinking water. Rummaging through the kitchen cabinets, he was able to find a pot with a lid that had a hole to vent steam and a second pot to collect the distilled water. He took the large pot for steaming and went to the river, filling it 2/3 of the way. Carrying it back into the house and into the kitchen, he placed it on the stove, put the lid on with the venting hole, inserted one end of the copper tubing, and positioned the other end of the tubing above the pot for collecting the final result. You don't have gas. How are you going to heat and boil the water? 124 pointed out the obvious. Miller looked at 124. Me. You can generate electricity with your reactor. Yes. Miller took his machete and began chopping at the wall between a light switch and a light socket. Exposing the electric wires, he pulled them out of the wall. With a Swiss Army knife from his pack, he was able to strip the copper wires of their plastic coating. The raw copper wires he wrapped around the steaming pot and placed the two ends of the wire into one of 124's charging sockets. Standing up, Miller asked, "Would you be so kind?" 124 powered the socket that caused the copper wire to glow with heat. "Not too much. You don't want to melt the wire," Miller warned. It was not long that the water began to boil and steam. Miller checked the end of the copper tubing that he had hanging above the collection pot. The first drop dripped out and fell into the pot. Using another test strip, he caught the second drop. The strip turned a light blue. Yes. Giving 124 the time to continue boiling the water, Miller decided they would make camp in the house for the night. He checked all the ground floor windows and doors to make sure they were secure. Returning to the kitchen, he then asked the robot to give a scan of the area. Still attached to the pot with the copper wire, 124 reported, "In their dormant state. When they sleep, I can only pick them up in a radius of 3 miles. When they're on the move, I can spot them 7 miles out." So, Miller asked again. "There are no signs of any nests within 3 miles, reported 124. My point is they could be just behind my range, just over 3 miles out from where we are now. We're still not that far from Stamford, and I was picking up a lot of nests in the city." "Well, they don't know we are here. I don't see any reason they would travel out here." Miller tried to not only reassure the robot, but also himself. "We already know there's a lot of game along the riverbanks. How do you not know that we haven't entered their hunting grounds? We should have kept moving." 124 protested. "I needed to resupply my water." Miller made it clear. "We should be fine, even if they hunt in this area. There is no reason for them to come near this house."